I welcome very much the opportunity of making a contribution to this debate, and I would like to commend Deputy Donnelly and his colleagues in the technical group for putting forward this motion and for allowing another opportunity to have a debate in this House on the issue of mortgage arrears and to try to deal with some of the bottlenecks in the system that are acting as barriers to having sustainable solutions put in place. I think it's a very balanced motion. I would change some words here or there, but the broad thrust of it, I have to say, I fully agree with, and I think it is an opportune time that we again debate this issue as we await the government coming forward with the long-awaited package of measures to deal with the whole issue of mortgage arrears. If I can go through some of the elements of the motion and the government's response, Deputy Donnelly's motion, I think, correctly highlights the lack of financial expertise and the lack of legal representation for borrowers, and that is a key issue. And I have to say, Minister, that when constituents come to me or people from all over the country contact me about mortgage arrears, they're generally not even aware of the information helpline. They're generally not even aware of the fact that when an offer is made by a bank that they're entitled to advice from an accountant on a listed panel. They're generally not even aware of that. And I think in the package that you are going to come forward with, that issue needs to be dealt with, because people aren't aware of the rights that they have, and the rights that they do have, in my view, are too narrow and too limited and need to be broadened. We need to make sure that borrowers who are dealing with banks who have endless resources on their side and are putting forward proposed solutions, we need to ensure the borrowers have access to financial expertise as well, to have the consequences of the offer gone through in detail with them, and that if necessary that they do have legal representation before the courts. There is a distinct lack of consistency in the offers that are being made at the moment by the financial institutions, and I know it is an issue that Deputy Donnelly has highlighted on many occasions, and I agree with him fully on this point. And it may well be anecdotal, but certainly from my own experience of dealing with cases where I believe I am seeing the full picture, because I am going through the standard financial statement form with the borrowers, I am dealing with the bank on their behalf and would be aware of all of the correspondence and contact. And some cases I just simply can't get my head around the way the bank is dealing with them. In other cases, I am seeing proper restructuring happening, but in similar cases where to me the facts look broadly similar, I'm seeing an entirely different approach being taken by sometimes the same financial institution, and certainly there are differences of approach between institutions as well. So I think that issue needs to be looked at, and I think the central bank does need to become much more prescriptive in terms of what is a sustainable solution and in what circumstances does that sustainable solution apply. Because if you look at the actual mortgage arrears targets programme, the key term there is that the bank must satisfy itself that what it is proposing is a sustainable solution. So again, the bank decides that in your case, borrower X, a split mortgage with interest on the warehouse portion is a sustainable solution. They will say they've complied with the CCMA, they've complied with the MARP programme, and there really isn't anywhere else for the borrower to turn. So I think the definition of a sustainable solution from the point of view of the borrower is a key point which is in this motion and which really should be dealt with as soon as possible. The issue of the insolvency service has been well discussed, and I sincerely hope that the government's response in the coming weeks on the issue of the insolvency service is as radical as it needs to be, because while the numbers are improving, the fact of the matter is that it is not coming even close to meeting the expectations which the government had for it, and it's certainly not coming even close to meeting the needs of borrowers who absolutely need to have access to an independent agency. And in my view, that independent agency should be empowered to make the final decision in respect of the restructuring of secured debt, and that involves completely removing the bank veto. What we're hearing from government sources is that there will be some form of a dilution of that veto, and we'll see what detail you come forward with, but in my view it needs to be dealt with. There are repossessions. The number of repossessions is growing. And the mortgage to rent scheme is hopelessly inadequate. And I've gone through the Minister's speech there while I was waiting and looking at the changes to that scheme. There are 88 cases completed in the whole country so far. It is hopelessly bureaucratic, involving too many bodies, and trying to move an application from one stage on to the next is a nightmare. And I'm sure other deputies in the House are dealing with individual cases, and that is going to have to be reformed, streamlined, made much more efficient, and essentially the process speeded up. And some of the conditions attached to it also need to be changed, in my view, in terms of the eligibility criteria. Just if I can move on to the suite of solutions that are being used at the moment, and the government is rightly welcoming the reduction in the number of mortgage accounts that are in arrears, but many of them are simply being reclassified into solutions that have yet to be truly tested, in the sense that if you are in arrears and then an arrears capitalisation arrangement is put in place, really it will take some time to become clear whether or not that arrangement is sustainable in your case. And it is a worry, I have to say, that in over a quarter of the cases that are being restructured, the solution of choice is simply to add all of the arrears onto the mortgage balance and to spread it out over the remainder of the term of the mortgage. Now, the stats are showing that it is one of the least effective solutions. It has only worked in 71.3% of cases, and I suspect that percentage is going to decline even further, because many of the cases that have recently been put on arrears capitalisation simply will find the repayment unsustainable in time, and that figure will reduce even further. In contrast, the split mortgage arrangement is quite successful at almost 96%, but again, it's early days for many of the cases where a split mortgage has been put in place. And Minister, I do believe that the government and the central bank should intervene directly and end the practice which Bank of Ireland in particular are pursuing, whereby they charge interest of 2.5% on the warehouse portion of a split mortgage. It makes no sense. If you're trying to separate out what a borrower can repay from what they can't repay, then charging interest in the warehouse portion, to my mind, is a nonsense, and I think it needs to change to make that product fit for purpose. And it's not fair as well that the Russian roulette that we have at the moment, that if you're a customer of AIB or permanent TSB, you get treated one way in respect of a split mortgage, which is an endorsed solution from the central bank. But if you are a customer of Bank of Ireland, you get an entirely different treatment of that very same solution. That simply is unfair, it's inconsistent, and it's going to result in some mortgages having so-called restructurings put in place that are simply not sustainable. So the suite of solutions that are working need to be enhanced. The terms need to be streamlined, and in my view, the application of them, we need greater consistency in respect of that. We do also need to have certainty in terms of residual debt, because that is one of the barriers to people in some cases acknowledging the inevitable. And some mortgages are completely unsustainable, and I would accept that. But in all of those cases where a solution is agreed with the borrower that involves the loss of ownership of the home, then the treatment of the residual debt should absolutely be agreed upfront, in my view. I want to touch on a few other issues which I believe are very relevant to this debate. One is the fact that we are in a very low interest rate environment, which thousands of tracker customers are benefiting from. The mortgage arrears situation would be far, far worse if we had an environment of high ECB interest rates. The current ECB rate of 0.05 will not last forever. It probably will last for some time yet, and we are likely to have an environment of low interest rates, but it won't continue indefinitely. And we need to factor that into how we are planning to deal with the mortgage arrears situation. The issue of standard variable rates is contributing to the level of mortgage arrears. The fact that people are paying 4 to 4.5%, an issue which is well ventilated in this House and at the Oireachtas Finance Committee, is directly contributing to the high level of mortgage arrears that we have, and it has to be part of the solution. It really has to be part of the solution. It is little remarked upon that mortgage interest relief is due to end completely at the end of 2017. At the moment, that is giving tax relief of about €250 million per annum to about 500,000 mortgage holders. When that ends, people will be looking at a net increase in their monthly mortgage repayment. That is a factor which I believe needs to be dealt with. And as you reform the mortgage to rent scheme, there is an urgent need to extend the tenancy protection service, which operates between Threshold and the Department of Social Protection for those who are renting in the market. And that scheme is currently there in Cork and Dublin. I certainly know of cases where it has worked, and I wish it well, but it needs to be extended to other cities and major urban areas, because I'm sure, Minister, in your own city of Waterford, the rent caps have been far outstripped by the actual market rents. I know they have in Cork by a country mile, where a couple with 2 kids are expected to find a property with a rent of no greater than €725 per month. The truth is, they'd be doing very, very well to find a property for €1,000 or perhaps even €1,100 in the urban areas, not just in the city, but also in the satellite towns around Cork City. Just in respect of the issue of repossessions, and I know what Deputy Cannon said there, that the reality is, and it's not often recognised, that for every home repossessed by way of a court order, a further 3 family homes are lost by way of voluntary sale or voluntary surrender. So if you're going to use the yardstick of repossessions by court order as being the measure of the loss of family homes, it's grossly inadequate and inaccurate. And if you look at the actual stats last year, you had a ratio of 3 to 1 of homes that were lost from voluntary surrender, were abandoned, or where there was a voluntary sale, as opposed to where there was an actual court order. And in my view, that issue also needs to be highlighted. And the truth is that the people in the opposition are not exaggerating this problem. If you look at the recent report from the Central Bank on the Mortgage Arrears Targets Programme, it confirms in black and white on Table 2 of that report that of the solutions proposed by the banks, the loss of ownership was going to be the outcome in 30,904 of those cases. 30,904 cases. And they're saying that in respect of the family home, principal private dwellings, that there were 16,683 concluded solutions. Now, I know that that does not equate to properties that have been actually repossessed, but it's a statement of intent nonetheless, because it's very clear that where the banks arrive at that conclusion, that unless something radically changes, there will be the loss of that home. And I think one of the major flaws in the Mortgage Arrears Targets programme that the government brought forward was allowing the banks to use the threat of legal action or the initiation of actual legal action as counting towards the sustainable solution targets. To my mind, that made a mockery of the entire process and really does need to change. One issue that rarely gets mentioned, and I think it does need to be mentioned, is the issue of buy-to-let properties, where the level of arrears is much higher, at 25%. Now, there's very little political appetite to discuss the situation of arrears in the buy-to-let sector for obvious reasons, but it has a direct impact on the rental market as well, because if you do not put in place excuse me, sustainable solutions for buy-to-let properties, many of those properties will be foreclosed upon by the banks, and the banks will sell them. And in the current environment, those properties are more likely to be bought by owner-occupiers than they are by investors. And that puts a further squeeze on a rental market which is already out of control. So it is in the interests of the economy and of society that sustainable solutions are also put in place in respect of buy-to-let properties. And on the issue of family home mortgages and the restructurings that we're seeing, it's very interesting when you look at the central bank breakdown of solutions. There's no breakdown provided for the heading of write-down, for example. None whatsoever. And I think that that needs to be a solution which is going to be used. And I would make the point, and I know that there are a variety of solutions being put forward on mortgage to lease and under other headings, but I would make the point that the banks have been very well capitalised by this state. by 2 successive governments. They have adequate capital, as has been confirmed independently by the ECB, to deal with the mortgage arrears crisis. They need to deal with it, and they need to deal with it by putting in place the solutions which have been confirmed by the central bank, including split mortgages and including the write-down of mortgage debt. There shouldn't be a need for a second round of transfers from the state to the banks, directly or indirectly, to deal with mortgage arrears. They have more than adequate capital, and it's about time they stepped up to the mark and dealt with it. Thank you.